On that dark and silent night, I was traveling along the famous road of forgetfulness, a route that was a true icon among truck drivers. The sky was shrouded in heavy clouds, creating an oppressive atmosphere, while a dense, suffocating mist spread over the asphalt, swallowing everything in sight. Historically, this stretch had always been wrapped in mysteries and hauntings. I grew up hearing the terrifying tales that circulated among drivers, stories of inexplicable disappearances and wandering souls roaming aimlessly along the road. However, I was never one to believe in ghosts. With a heavy load behind me and a burning desire to reach my destination, I decided not to give in to fear and sped up, determined to push through the darkness. As I drove, a strange and unsettling feeling began to surround me like fog, stirring a growing apprehension within. The radio, playing a melancholy tune, seemed to amplify the tension in the air, as if the music sensed the unease in my heart. Glancing at the rearview mirror, a shadowy figure started to take shape within the mist, moving with a supernatural fluidity. At first, I thought it was just an illusion, the product of my tired mind, haunted by the atmosphere around me. Yet that figure's presence persisted, as if it were drawing closer, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, a thought that made my heart race and adrenaline surge through my veins. With each passing mile, uncertainty morphed into a tangible anxiety. It was as if the road, stretching endlessly, had become a labyrinth of fears and uncertainties. Unanswered questions flooded my mind. Was it merely the loneliness and darkness of this path? Or was there something more sinister lurking? The engine's hum blended with the noise of the mist, and the sensation of being watched intensified with each second. What could that shadow be? A hallucination? Or perhaps the manifestation of all the fears I never wanted to face? With every moment, the unease grew stronger, and I knew I had to uncover the truth behind that presence. The fog began to thicken alarmingly, and visibility dropped drastically, turning the road into a tangle of shadows and uncertainty. With the truck's headlights illuminating only a few meters ahead, each curve became a challenge, a twisted and menacing path that seemed to invite danger. Although I knew I had to remain calm and focused, fear crept into each of my thoughts, like a poison slowly spreading. The atmosphere around me seemed to vibrate with a palpable tension, heightening the feeling that something was about to happen. Then, to my surprise, a whisper sliced through the oppressive silence. It was a soft, enticing voice, almost like a distant call, that seemed to resonate from outside the truck, calling my name. Curiosity, however, was irresistible. With an almost involuntary impulse, I looked out the window, and what I saw made me freeze. A woman dressed in white stood there, her empty and piercing eyes fixed on me, as if they were penetrating the very essence of my soul. The image was surreal, and I couldn't understand how someone could be in such an isolated place, in the middle of the night and fog, without me noticing her presence before. Panic began to form in my stomach as the figure started to move slowly towards me, like a relentless shadow advancing. My instinct screamed at me to speed up, but to my horror I realized that the faster I went, the closer she seemed to get, as if she were glued to my truck, defying all logic and reality. Fear took over me, and my heart beat frantically as the stories I'd heard before returned with terrifying clarity. The road of forgetfulness, cursed and full of legends about lost spirits and hauntings, now became a tangible reality before my eyes. I desperately tried to find a logical explanation for what was happening, but every thought slipped away like sand through my fingers. The woman continued to watch me, motionless, as if she were expecting something from me, a reaction or an act that I didn't know. The atmosphere was becoming unbearable, and the only certainty I had was that I needed to make a decision. Yet in the darkness of that road, the choice seemed further away than ever. Just as I was about to lose hope, the figure of the woman vanished suddenly, as if she had never been there. An instant relief washed over me, and I thought I could finally relax and leave behind that terrifying experience. However, before I could take a deep breath and feel the weight of fear dissipate, a wave of intense cold flooded the truck, like a warning that something was still wrong. A strong gust of wind struck the cabin, causing the windows to shake, and in a flash, I saw dark shapes dancing around me, reflected in the truck's headlights. The voices began to grow, a true chorus of wails and desperate pleas echoing in the solitude of the road, and I realized with horror that I was surrounded by those lost souls. The road, once a simple path, was now a labyrinth of hauntings, where each turn seemed to lead to a new nightmare. With my heart racing and adrenaline surging through my veins, I accelerated once more, determined to escape that insane reality. Each movement seemed to make the figures more visible, as if they were feeding on my fear. The road began to clear ahead, and as I moved away, the shadows and whispers slowly faded into the fog, leaving behind an unsettling silence. Finally, I spotted a gas station in the distance, like a beacon of hope amid the despair. When I arrived, I was sweating cold, hands trembling, and my mind filled with unanswered questions. The attendant looked at me with an understanding expression as I recounted my story, and to my surprise, I realized I wasn't the only one who had lived through a similar experience. He confirmed that the road of forgetfulness was indeed a cursed place, a stretch where many had met tragic ends. I left the station determined never to return. The attendant's words echoed in my mind, like an echo that couldn't be ignored. Some roads, he said, are best left unexplored, and that one definitely was. As I drove toward the safety and light of civilization, a new resolve arose within me. That experience wasn't just a nightmare. It was a lesson about the limits of curiosity and the respect we must have for the mysteries that inhabit the world. The road may be tempting, but sometimes the best thing to do is simply not look back. I was never a trucker who felt comfortable giving rides, but that night, a strange wave of generosity swept over me. As I drove along the deserted road, the soft sound of the radio filled the air, creating a relaxing atmosphere that contrasted with the night's darkness. The dashboard lights illuminated the truck's interior and shadows danced on the walls. Then, by the side of the road, I spotted a lone figure. He was a peculiar-looking man with worn-out clothes and an expression that conveyed more confusion than despair. He waved with a trembling hand, and almost instinctively, I decided to stop. At that moment, I had no idea that this simple choice would change the course of my life forever. When the man entered the truck and settled into the passenger seat, a chill ran down my spine. The cold that emanated from him seemed to penetrate the warm air of the vehicle. He didn't say much at first, only murmured a "thank you" before turning his gaze to the window, as if searching for something in the darkness outside. There was something unsettling about his expression, a shadow of memories lingering in the air between us. I tried to start a conversation, asked where he was coming from, but his answers were brief and evasive, as if he were trapped in a labyrinth of dark thoughts. The silence that settled quickly became heavy, enveloping the truck as we moved down the empty road, each mile intensifying the tension growing between us. The atmosphere inside the truck seemed to shift with each passing minute, and the air was charged with a strange sense of expectation. The man continued to look outside, his eyes reflecting the headlights that briefly illuminated the road ahead. It was as if he were running from something, or perhaps searching for a place that no longer existed. The radio, which had once played softly, now felt like distant background noise, as my mind drifted into speculation about the stranger's past. The silence became almost deafening, and a feeling that something was about to happen began to take hold of me. At that moment, the road ahead was not just a path, but an open door to the unknown. and I was about to cross a boundary I never imagined possible. As I drove, I began to notice the road growing darker, as if we were entering a place that shouldn't exist. The shadows thickened as we moved forward, and the landscape around us began to shift in a disturbing way. The vegetation, once sparse and ordinary, now turned into a dense, menacing forest, with trees that seemed to lean toward us, as if they wanted to hear the secrets unfolding within the truck. My heart began to race, pounding with an intensity I couldn't ignore. Something was very wrong, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what was bothering me. I glanced away from the road to look at the man beside me, only to find him staring at me with a penetrating, dark gaze, intensifying my unease. I decided to ignore the strange feeling invading me and tried to be polite. "Where do you come from?" I asked, forcing a friendly tone into my voice. He smiled, but it was a hollow smile, devoid of any warmth. "I come from a place that no longer exists," he replied, and his words seemed to echo in a deep abyss, carrying the weight of a lost story. Fear began to settle in my chest, like a dark creature feeding off the tension building between us. His presence was oppressive, as if the air inside the truck were becoming heavier, making it harder to breathe. The road, once a familiar path, now seemed to stretch infinitely ahead, as if we were trapped in an endless maze. The trees around us seemed to watch, silent witnesses to an encounter that defied logic. Shadows danced beyond the reach of the headlights, and each turn revealed more darkness. The idea that we were moving away from everything familiar solidified in my mind, and the feeling of being pulled into a bottomless abyss grew stronger. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, seeking an explanation, but his expression had turned grim, and the answer I sought seemed lost somewhere between the past and the present. The atmosphere was heavy with a sinister expectation, as if the trees, the road, and the very universe were awaiting an outcome I couldn't foresee. And as I drove, I realized that the real challenge was not the road ahead, but the reality itself, which was beginning to crumble around me. The conversation continued, but with each response he gave, the atmosphere grew heavier, filled with a tension that left me uneasy. He began sharing dark stories about people who had disappeared on that road, and how he still saw them wandering at night, like lost shadows in a world that no longer accepted them. "Some of them can't leave," he whispered, and his words seemed to resonate like a sinister warning. Panic started to take over, twisting my stomach. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I too could become one of those wandering souls, doomed to roam forever. With each passing minute, the road became both more familiar and more strange, as if the outlines of the world around me were dissolving into a nightmare becoming reality. Finally, when I reached a crossroads, the internal pressure became unbearable, and I realized I could no longer ignore the feeling that I was losing control. The man, who until then seemed like a dark, constant presence beside me, was getting ready to leave the truck. A sudden impulse took hold of me, and as he opened the door, I sped up, wanting to leave that dark moment behind. But to my surprise, he remained still, just watching me, with a look that seemed to pierce through my soul. When I looked back, a chill ran down my spine. He had vanished, like a ghost fading into the mist. The feeling of relief lasted only an instant, a flash of hope, before reality became even more terrifying. When I looked in the rearview mirror, something made me freeze at the wheel. A dark figure, floating on the road, slowly moving toward my truck. My heart raced, and fear gripped every fiber of my being. It was as if that presence had emerged from the very abyss the man had mentioned, a witness to those lost souls. I never picked up hitchhikers again and never trusted strangers by the roadside. The experience marked me in such a way that the memory of that encounter would haunt me forever, a constant warning about the dangers of the unknown and the fragility of reality. From that day on, The road was no longer just a path, but a painful reminder of a fate that could have been my own.